Do you have 20 minutes? Of course you do. Why not spend them with me for one of my 10 tales for tired adults? Perfect for when you're just waking up and want to avoid looking at your phone but be entertained, or when you are struggling to fall asleep. Tale the 5th, The Artist and His Magic by E. Braidwood. If you were to see an empty easel in a room, what would your first question be? Some might wonder where the artist was, or indeed their art and their materials. Some might cynically wonder whether having the easel out was an exercise in showing off, or an unsubtle conversation starter at a dull party. Many would not see the easel at all, looking past it as though it was so much furniture, as inconsequential as one's chaise longue or writing bureau. What do you mean you don't have one of these? Are they not commonplace? Why, in my home... Forgive me. I have let myself get ahead of the story, and this is not a story about me, but an artist who lived long ago, who saw the world rather differently than you or I. Clothwaits was a man of means, or as many ex-lovers called him, and believe me, there were many, a mean man. He had known he was an artist almost before he had understood that he was also a human being, and for him the two states of being were interchangeable. It came as quite a shock, therefore, when he realised, aged 12, that not only could others not paint, or draw, or sculpt, or collage, but that they also weren't aware of the artist's magic. It occurs to me that you might not know either. After all, those who know of the artist's magic are also often in possession of a chaise longue, which for your reference is a kind of undulating and rather provocative furniture from France. For those of you who do know, I insist that you go and stretch out upon yours right now, or at least find the nearest facsimile about your home. After all, we are here to relax. Are we not? Again, I digress. Much like in the magic circle, we artistes are unwilling to give up the secret of our magic. Yet in the case of this story, it must be given up, as it is a tale of an artist neglecting his magic, but for very good reason. In every metaphorical artist's paint box or toolbox or music box, there lies one essential tool, a little magic. It's near impossible to see, but an artist knows when it has made itself visible. All at once, a thought might come to them, as lightly and unassumingly as a butterfly alighting on an outstretched hand. And despite its gentleness, that thought could provide the key to their whole artwork, as quickly as turning a page. And that fragrant buzzing feeling, as gentle and temporary as flight in a dream, will suddenly lift the whole creative endeavour up from one level to the next. Once that feeling has exhibited itself, usually in childhood, although it can take a little while to recognise, it can be sought, quietly on a long walk, or whilst doing something else with one's hands, but it can never be grasped or wrestled into its shape. It is a whim, a will-o'-the-wisp, a half-forgotten memory circling the brain like an ice skater. It is what some people call genius. Clothwaits discovered his magic early on. He was exceptionally lucky. His comfortable home life lent itself to exploration, to deep thinking, to long afternoons wandering the grounds, picking strawberries from the vine and wondering how to capture that exact red hue in his pastel drawings, as that afternoon would be his art lesson, overseen by the obligatory governess. Already he felt the magic all around him. but especially in nature, as though the world were humming a soft tune to him and inviting him not only to witness its quiet beauty, but also to replicate it. He had found, although he kept it to himself, that often he could reproduce flowers and fruit so perfectly on the canvas that they seemed to attract insects or trickle juice. More than once he had felt the temptation to peel them from the canvas and consume them. Sometimes he would paint rotting fruit and find himself lost in a soft whirlwind of thought, so that soon the fruit on the canvas appeared to be in perfect condition, and indeed so was the fruit in the bowl. It seemed bizarre to him, but he ignored any deeper thoughts with the disinterest of youth. It was on one of those particularly gentle and golden afternoons when he was undertaking his studies, albeit under his own instruction, drawing items around the room and wishing for some natural light, that he decided to draw his governess. He drew the curtain very slightly and cringed, wondering if she would wake from her gentle doze. No, still she rested, only now in a beam of white light, her face suffused into it as though it were melting away to join the sun. Clove had always thought her ugly, when he had thought of her at all. She was very old, after all, around 32. Her brow was heavy, and so were her chins, and as he painted he felt that shiver of rich magic run down his arm and into his paintbrush, and without meaning to, began to make improvements. A little lighter on the brows here, a little redder on the rouged cheeks, certainly just the one chin. He found that with an upward stroke of his brush he could very easily erase the wrinkles around her eyes and find the younger face she had left behind her in her enigmatic past. He did not altogether dislike the look of it. When he woke from his reverie a little later, he saw, to his astonishment, that the subject of the painting no longer sat in the sunlight, but instead was stood beside him, with a smile of such effervescent shock and delight that she almost raised him into the air. Is that how you see me, Clove?" she asked. Her face seemed lifted somehow, her eyebrows lighter, her cheeks plump and pleased. Clove didn't reply. He was aware of a creeping dismay all over his body. Not only was her face more and more like that of the paintings, but so was her body. It was becoming more slender and youthful before his eyes. She looked down and span in delight. "I never thought I could see myself in this way again. I never believed it would be possible." And with that, she ran up the stairs 2 at a time and could be heard collecting her things and thumping around the room like a wild animal. Clove stood in the silent room, as still as one of his own still lives. He had always been able to ignore or deny the strangeness of his skill as a painter. That when he painted something living, breathing oxygen, it could almost come to life, or be even more alive than the real thing. He gazed at his painting and wondered at the beauty of it. It seemed almost as though it were coming alive before his eyes, just like the real thing, his strangely young governess. Yet this was not the thing which disconcerted him. Throughout painting his governess, making her younger, more beautiful, more delicate, all he had been able to think was, what if I made her older? and although he would not admit it to himself, he wondered if he could paint somebody to death.
What's this racket?
Cloves stiffened immediately. The voice was that of his father, Lord Thwaites, who he knew resented any noise at all, and he was certain that he would be to blame. "Father," he said, turning to face him. The two Thwaiteses regarded each other uncomfortably. The afternoon sun by now no longer sang through the room, and nor did the artist's magic. Instead, it was simply a plain room of reds and browns, trapped by the ticking of its old carriage clock.
"I feel it is time you were sent away to school,"
said Lord Thwaites, barely moving his lips. Clove thought quickly. That would mean no more walks about the garden, no more freedom to paint, a life more restricted, not the life of an artist at all. But he dare not refuse his father, and nodded slowly. "That is well, father," he said, "but I must insist that you allow me to paint your portrait before I leave." Time passed, and so did Clove's father. In time, Clove forgot not only the governess and his father, but also the strange ability he had begun to discover. Whether he forgot it in truth, we shall never know, but he was certainly deeply ensconced within his studies. Later, when he felt the time was right, he went away to the usual universities to study the masters, and had his natural ability broken apart and put together again in a slightly different order. There was one thing he would never do, which frustrated his professors and benefactors alike. He would not paint a living thing. "I do not paint from life," he would say, and shrug, never explaining, only drifting away in infuriating nonchalance.
"Our apologies,"
his professors would say to the ever more eminent benefactors who came to the university to show their interest and offer their money.
"He simply refuses to. You know the artistic temperament. Perhaps I can show you another artist's work. No?"
For they would never accept any artist but Clove Thwaites, not only because his distant landscapes and great nautical vistas seemed to sing with life, but also because he refused, a secret magic that artists also possess, for to refuse the wealthy is to frustrate them into obsession. One day the king came to visit. He had heard tales of this great and obscure artist, and was certain, with the usual royal arrogance, that he could convince the great Clove Thwaites to paint him.
"Surely you can be persuaded. The king will make a great donation to the university if you do, and your future will be certain."
What is this, Thwaites? Some sort of argument against his political leaning? It's certain to be that. This young man shall come to nothing if he cannot put those political feelings aside. For the king was known for his cruelty. Yet still Clove Thwaites would not agree, and soon the king was prevailed upon to accept a far weaker painter, still a master of course, and if you are the sort that goes to galleries, then you may have seen his work. The king came every Wednesday afternoon to sit for the young painter, and strangely enough, Clove Thwaites himself often found excuses to come and sit at the back of the room, ostensibly to support his friend and colleague, but rather more to feed an urge he had ignored for a long time. The younger artist trembled with bravado at his presence, but soon began to ignore him except when he needed things fetched and carried. As such, the king soon let himself forget that he had been declined, particularly when he saw Thwaites, this apparent genius, bringing him tea and cleaning his boots. Soon he was certain that he had made the right decision. On the final day of painting, Clove-Thwaites did not appear. All that night he had felt the hum of magic building up in his right hand, which longed to grasp a brush. None of the usual distractions would work. After all, there are only so many times one can paint a still life or a cloud or a droplet of water without wishing there was a little life in it. I must stay away, he said to himself. I must ignore this urge. Whether I believe it or not, it would be improper to interfere. Yet if he would only use a little blue beside his brown, or address some of the weight in his paint strokes. No, it is hopeless to dream. I had my choice. I rejected it. Morally, it was the right thing to do. Even so, after the dinner bell had rung, and after his colleagues had scurried to the dinner hall, and the king had left in his carriage, and rather as though he had meant to do it all along, he was drawn inextricably down to the salon where the king had been sitting that day. He drew back the dust cover to gaze upon the painting, nearly finished and still wet. He tutted to himself. It was not bad. Perhaps the young man would come good after all. But he had been dishonest and overly complimentary. For the man in the painting held a likeness to the king, but the artist had taken years off him, and that was untruthful. If Clove could only add a touch of yellow, a little dab of natural light here and there, a little more grey in the hair, then the king would look his true age. No matter if it was too much. After all, the king was aging rapidly. Perhaps he could make him a little longer in the tooth, a little heavier, a little wrinklier and more tired. There. Now the painting truly showed the king, a once powerful warrior, in the winter of his years. Clove felt the hum of magic operate his arm, as though it had naught to do with him at all. The brush raised, the paint mixed and dabbed here and there, almost as though it did it by itself. And he felt drunk with that same deep fugue he had felt on the last two occasions when he had painted a living thing. Within what seemed like seconds, it was done, and Clove-Thwaites returned to his room with a heavy heart and a blankness in his mind. The next day, the newspapers all said the same. The king is dead. It seemed some dangerous health concern, thought to be lingering in his future, had caught up with him and taken him sooner than was fair. A stark reminder that even royalty are only human, they warned. A great and heart-breaking loss. The king is dead. Long live the king. So the headlines declaimed. Long live the king. And he did, in his painting, just like Clove's father did in his. Thank you for listening. That was The Artist and His Magic by E. Braidwood, one of my 10 tales for tired adults. If you would like to hear more, please consider liking and subscribing. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, especially if you know which work of classic literature inspired this to a great extent.